Wheel of Time Spoilers podcast.
Welcome to Path of Tangents. Today, Seth and I are joined by Morgan, podcast of the Dragon, and EgweneFanboy, whose real name I completely forget because I have a brain like a sieve.
When it's your tag in Discord, that's all we read over and over and over again, and it just creates a groove in your brain.
That's quite all right. I don't mind. I mean, EFB is what you can call me. That's fine.
Awesome.
My name is Chad.
Chad. Thank you. Thank you. That has all not been bothering me for over a week.
She did. She mentioned it to me. She's like, I've got EgweneFanboy on. Shit, I should know what his real name is. That was like 2 weeks ago when you said something about that.
It's been on my mind. Anyhow, we have our two guests with us today to discuss, Path of Tangents. The events so what I thought we should do is discuss the events in our timeline while we got through this book. I divided our discussion into 4 sections with date brackets, and I made myself a table of notes because I'm extra about what happens in the books and of the chapters, as well as sort of a column of like personal events and then also larger real world events during that same period of time. Because I don't want to get too deep into making depressed commentary about the real world, but I also feel like we come to this podcast for escapism, and we definitely edit the podcast to make sure that it is full of escapism. And so we sometimes brush past a lot of stuff in the real world. And so this is a space where, like, to some extent, we can give a little bit of airtime to these things that we very deliberately normally protect you, our dear listeners, from, because we are giving you a respite. So that's going to be a fun balance for us to strike. So I asked our guests and Seth, in theory, to kind of also think about what events in their lives parallel our process through this book and what was going on for them. And our time periods are as follows. There was the beginning, which is from SpoilerCon in October through mid-November. That is like the Bowl of the Winds gets used, right? And then there is the hiatus, which is November through January, when we paused for the show. Yeah, and we got completely absorbed by the show, and that took up all of our energy, and there was no podcast, but nonetheless, Wheel of Time was very much why there was no podcast. So that's
there was
a period.
YouTube content.
Yeah, there's a period to talk about there. And then there's the return, which is mid-January through JordanCon. That's an arbitrary deadline because Seth and I both had thought we were going to go, and then neither of us went, and so sure. And then there's the ending, which is the month of May. So that's kind of our 4 chunks that I'm going to try to keep us organized along. This is Path of Tangents and On the Heights. And by heights, I mean I'm smoking and drinking. The paths are paved with tangents. So with that being said, maybe our guests could reintroduce themselves real quick.
I'm Morgan, and I host Path of the Dragon, which is a topical literary analysis of the Wheel of Time. And yeah, I got invited on for Path of Tangents because I was not able to come on for the extra bit, the chapter where Logain bonds Tovane, because I got the JordanCon COVIDs, and I was really, really sad about it. So thank you for inviting me on for this to make up for it.
That was the one thing we avoided by not going to JordanCon. A lot of people got the JordanCon COVIDs.
Yeah, it was very sad. So anyway, yeah, that's me.
Yeah, I'm Chad, aka EgweneFanboy, and I'm just a super fan of the show. I listened to the entire thing from New Year's Day until March, and then I got to hear on the show for this book, actually. And then I reached out to Radio and was like, hey, if you need someone, I would love to be a part again. And I think I did a good job last time. I hope I did anyway. I came back. That's a good sign.
It's a good sign. It's a good sign when we have you back. Well, thank you both so much for coming.
Thank you for having me on.
And I guess, most podcasts do a spoiler warning before they get into spoilers, but we're doing a real world issues warning. Normally, we don't go into that, but if you don't want to talk about any real world issues, be very careful.
If you don't want to know our politics, then skip. I don't want to perseverate, but it's going to be unavoidable if we can.
When Aradia first told me her idea for the outline and everything, I was going through the message she sent. And she said, please list any topics that you either make sure we want to feature or want to avoid. And I was like, how many of those topics are the exact same thing?
Yeah, it's a balance.
And I want to pause and do a quick shout out to Zach, aka Smokey, who just absolutely Smokey. Thank you so much. On Patreon, he gave us a huge donation that is basically going to allow us to get to WatCon without impoverishing ourselves, because it turns out plane tickets and hotel rooms and everything were just becoming out of our reach, and with his help we are definitely going to be able to go. So if you want to see us at WatCon, we will be there. And a huge shout out to Smokey, because yeah, that was super generous. And I'm going to pause and say thank you. You went above and beyond with that. That was amazing.
For sure. And to that, I would add that, I've been bitching on the podcast about how poor I am. But, what I mean is that I'm very well resourced and don't have a lot of discretionary money. I'm not poor. Okay. I am not complaining about being poor. It's that plane tickets to a fan convention stretch the discretionary income I have left. That's the context of me complaining. But nonetheless, I really appreciate the fact that me bitching about it made resources come out. Ask and you shall receive. Squeaky wheel gets the grease, whatever. Thank you so much, Smokey, for, basically getting us the room. You basically just covered the room, which is a third. It's the room and the flights that. So, that's about a third of our total cost as a business. So
huge shout out to just the generous Patreons and the generous fan base that keeps this podcast going, right? You're the reason we get to keep doing this. You're the reason that this exists, and we come back week after week after week. Yeah, thank you.
And now I'm flying my ass alone across the country to arrive in a strange city at 1 a.m. by myself. This is a level of firsts I was not anticipating, and it's because of you guys. Personal growth through fandom engagement. What's not to like?
It's amazing.
Weird, though. With that, should we get into the beginning of our timeline? So the beginning starts at SpoilerCon. We start in October. We actually do the prologue there, and this goes up through the beginning of the show. So what happens in the book is that Varen sets up the compulsion that we just saw getting wrapped up at the very end of the book. It's that gets set up. The Bowl of the Wind gets used, obviously. And we've also got Fail meeting Morghese, Elias returning, and Grandal meeting Sindane. Those are kind of the big plot points that happened in the book between SpoilerCon and the show coming out. For us personally, I just really mainly we had Kayla on the podcast, which was a super, super fun thing, even though, what was it? My internet went out 10 minutes into the recording because of a storm.
Oh, no.
So
that's right.
I didn't actually get to participate in that recording at all, which was a bummer.
That was fun, though. It was great to just hang out with Kayla. She did a great job in picking up the slack.
I wanted to talk with Kayla. I was denied. But that was great. A treat. My whole region fell out of power. It was a storm. The other big thing for me was that it was the 1 year anniversary of moving into my house in that period. So that's just kind of a thing for me. So what about you guys? What do you think about the book in your lives in this period?
Go, fanboy.
Okay. So I'm probably going to be a little maybe metaphysical or whatever. So because I've been dealing, because let me say this right now, again, shout out to mental health parity. We definitely need mental health parity in every single thing. I've been dealing with just a severe bout of anxiety. Anxiety. There you go. With anxiety and subsequent depression and everything. And it got really at a peak last fall, actually, while I was reading this book. So it's very emotional to go back and listen to these episodes again and hear and kind of almost have a memory of yourself of where you were when you heard that episode the first time. It's so sensorial. So yeah. So, and then of course, last fall was also, I feel like things were I mean, God, I don't even remember like what was going on politically last fall because there's been so much happening. We weren't at war yet. I do know that. You know.
Yeah. I feel like that was possibly the like a slight calm before the storm.
Well,
if that makes sense.
That's a great way to describe, because also I think abortion was legal in October. Right?
Yeah. My notes for the real world for October are that there's just more death from the pandemic and general violence. COP26 happened / didn't happen, and it was LGBT History Month. When I tried to scan world events, it was just a background simmer of fuckery.
I like Seth's calm for the storm. So, especially because I was dealing with my own internal stuff, and then external was kind of, I guess, quiet for a good reason.
So it was like going into SpoilerCon. You know, I had started doing episodes for book 4, so I was kind of in a crunch to try to get my first episode out, because I was like, you know, I want to have something that freshly dropped. So you guys did your intro episode, and I was like not really good at peopling, like my social anxiety, you know, because I have basically been, you know, working as a housewife and just doing stuff at home and trying to kind of focus on making content and everything for the last 2 years. And so I was like kind of on the struggle bus, you know, at SpoilerCon, and so I would just kind of pop in and out of events and retreat back to my room and go do, you know, like go walk around the city by myself and everything. And so I kind of sat down, and I was telling Chad that like I really struggle to actually focus and be self-disciplined about doing podcast stuff. And so I took advantage of the fact that I was in a hotel room and like had minimal distractions. I actually like walked to the UPS store in downtown Portland to buy like a legal pad because I didn't have any notebooks, and I bought some like cheap ass gas station pens and started doing my rough draft notes for my 28th episode or whatever, which is my episode about the coup. And so that ended up being a hardcore breakdown, and I have a lot of political commentary. I kind of go on a rant toward the end of it, basically, because there are a lot of real life, you know, things that you can draw between, you know, the, political identity of the Red Aja that seems to, you know, be pervasive through the Tower, and how so many people are, you know, that was one of the things I was sad about not being able to be on for the episode that I was able, you know, or wanting to be on for, because about liking the character of Pavara, but how she has like her red identity, and so she forgives Elida for things, you know, and continues to make excuses. And so I kind of went on a rant and was just sort of like just full of lots of feelings about all that kind of stuff, and I felt like I was just getting out lots of anxieties. And so I ended up making tons of notes and kind of putting out a banger of an episode, and what I felt was one of my best episodes. But I was kind of like at the end of it thinking, well, if people don't like, you know, if people want escapism from their podcasts, they're not going to be a big fan if they just come into my podcast from somewhere and they listen to this, their first one, because they're going to see me at the end of it kind of getting a little overwrought. And yeah, so I got a little overwrought there. And it was, I agree with, you know, Chad, that this has been a mental health year in general, and just, yeah, lots of stuff going on. And that's not very articulate or anything, but it's just sort of like, I felt like I was just beginning to try to start interacting with people again, and it was, you know, kind of tough. So
yeah, and that era for me was all about the show is coming, right? To me, that dominated those few weeks. Is like, okay, the show is coming. As a content creator, I want to address the show. I want to, you know, this thing is happening, you know, and at that point I had nothing but positive vibes, you know, about the creators, about the cast, about everything that had been announced. I was really, really, really anticipating sitting down, loving this show, and being able to just anticipate it blowing up and having to deal with an overwhelming income of interest in the show and the podcast, right? That was sort of in my head, I think particularly, I've been talking to Nabe Liss from his Tarvalin After Dark, right? So at that point also we'd picked up at the previous JordanCon, I'd picked up editing Tarvalin After Dark, right? I'd talked to Nabe Liss, and so that was also one of the things I was doing. And so I was in pretty frequent conversations with Jess and Nabes and Brian from that podcast. And, sort of in the community was this idea that, like, once the show comes out, it's going to be the next big thing, TM, and we are going to be overwhelmed with interest and people who are going to flock to our podcasts and flock to our YouTube content. And there's going to be just an incredible amount of interest. We can talk about exactly what happened a little bit later. But for me, when we talk about anxiety, that's where my anxiety was focused. That's where my sort of thoughts were focused. And it shames me to think that, like, I don't think I was paying as much attention to the book content because I was so focused on the show content and all the leaks and everything that was coming out at that point. And to me, that's the news, right? I was talking to people, all my conversations were centered around what are you going to do when the show drops and you have to deal with just hundreds and hundreds of new fans.
There was so much anxiety to it. I had to learn a new video editing application because the one that I had picked was garbage. So, yeah.
Yeah, we were doing video. We were trying to ramp up the video. I don't know if you remember from that time, but me and Aradia were doing, we were recording all the video, and I was trying to put out video episodes for every podcast we did, which we're not doing anymore.
Because it was unedited, because it was too much work.
Right,
it was,
yeah.
But yeah, no, that's right. I forgot. That's why I can't think of what happened in my life. Is because everything was consumed by anticipating the show.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
Consumed. Like...
and that's something that I think we've decided not to do again, right? Like,
yeah, no.
I know I've deliberately stepped back from news about the show. I don't want to see any leaks. I felt that, like, the things that were leaked weren't ruined for me in the show, but it was like, oh, there's that scene that I already know all the way about. I didn't have the surprise and the shock.
Yeah, I almost feel like we were, this does say we were hyper aware. We were hyper aware to everything.
Yes.
I mean, I remember every Facebook group, the conversations with anyone you knew who about the thing, anyone who liked Game of Thrones. And then, of course, when you're on this show, you're like you're listening. I'm listening for podcasts for you guys to tell us what you're doing and what about the show and your take on it. And you're just heightened aware. And it's unlike when we probably had a similar hyper awareness when books were coming out. There was a lot less like over communication of it and a lot less. I'm going to say this. Like, I hope this is okay. But I really, really have come to believe that social media is the source of so much of everyone's anxiety. Like, I really stayed off of social media, and it has helped so much. Like, yeah, I mean,
it's true.
I don't want to cut anyone's numbers. I'm a realtor. I've got to have a Facebook account and Instagram. I want everyone to like my page, but take a break, man. Jeez.
Yeah, I had to determine, because I was sort of like, well, if I want the exposure that I want, because it's just sort of like my podcast is kind of niche, and I was just sort of like, I need to be making YouTube stuff, so I had to learn new skills, and it's like, for me, any new skill is scary until I learn it, and I just felt this pressure to, get stuff out, learn new things, all of this kind of stuff, and do it in time, because there was this, like, what felt like a crushing deadline, and, I reached this point where I was like, this is fucking ridiculous, I'm doing something that's super niche, because I do have people who like my show. I've got people who listen to my show, but it's like people tend to like, first-time reader podcasts. They like podcasts that go through the books. That's stuff that tends to be more popular. You gotta know the material intimately to really appreciate my podcast, so I just have a smaller appeal than a lot of people. So I was like, I'm not gonna be able to fucking eat making what I make, so I have to just let it go and not push myself so hard to be like, I've got to get all this stuff out and everything, because it's like, what's the fucking point? Because my wife is like, don't kill yourself over this, It was just sort of like, it was...
And it takes the joy out.
Yes.
Then the thing that you got into, because it was fun. I mean, like, it was hard for Seth and I to get back into it at first, like... lots of content creators suffered from burnout, like social media, content creation hurdles, deadlines. Like there was so much burnout in the content creator world. It took us a year to get it back, in some cases, some people it was really draining.
Yeah, and if I can, your 4 categories I would retitle as the anticipation, the burnout, the return, the struggle to come back, and then the actual return to content, right?
That would have been a way to phrase it, yeah.
Yeah, it really was. It took a good couple of months after the show came out of us getting back into the books and getting back into Robert Jordan's writing before I found the joy in the Wheel of Time again. And I really did lose it when the show came, during the run of the show. And I think, and I don't want to blame the show for that. I want to blame
assholes.
The assholes, yes. I was going to say the community, the fan reaction out there, and I don't want to even say fan reaction because it was
not the fan reaction. That
the
would be
fan
the wrong
reaction.
way to say it,
Yeah,
reactions.
The reactions from people and social media, like you were saying, and then and self-imposed pressure. Right, that was really. I think we can jump into the hiatus here. Arady and I sat down and tried to make a lot of video content. And we made reaction videos, right? Because again, like you were saying, Morgan, people need to have finished the books to get into the Spoilers podcast. People who have just sat down and watched the TV show, turns out, aren't going to sit down and look up a Spoilers podcast, right? So we were trying to create content, which was reaction videos and then deep down breakdowns. We got the reaction videos out, right? Those were pretty short. Those were doable. We recorded breakdown videos. We did not get those published.
Yep.
And that was a major failure I felt that was a major failure because we took a good amount of time off. We took, nearly 3 months off recording the podcast to create those videos. And it was a huge failure on my part to not get those out. And that was entirely due to burnout, right? It was entirely due to the amount of pressure that was created, and like you said, new skills, and I'll take this opportunity to apologize, right? Like I really do feel like I failed the fans, both of the podcast and just of the show, in not producing the content that I wanted to produce over that 3-month period of time, and I still feel guilt about that,
As an actual fan of the show, like not a content creator, you guys are okay. We were burnt out too, and I don't even know if everyone even noticed because we just I feel like we were all going through something together. I mean, when you listen to the show and everything else, and the anticipation, like you said, of the show. So yeah, as on behalf of the fan community, we officially forgive you, absolve you. Do not carry that guilt with
Thank
you.
you.
It's okay.
Thank you. And I've gotten over it now, but there was a time where that made it hard to come back to recording a podcast.
I can imagine.
We had a pile of videos. We had this. Gosh, how many hours of content? It ended up being like
6 hours per video.
Oh damn.
Per video, and we had episodes, and we got
because it was 2 videos per episode. It amounted to it was.
I think 30 hours of video content that we recorded that has not been released.
So to follow up on this, sadness fest, there is light at the end of the tunnel because we still have the audio.
Right.
And I think, roughed in a pretty quick and dirty process to make the audio something releasable that is reasonably cleaned up without getting 36 hours worth of editing deep. I think I can pretty much automate it. There didn't hate my first rough draft.
No, it was great. She took the final episode that we recorded and did a very rough edit on it, and it was great. There were parts of it that I was like, oh my god, I can't believe. I would love to go back and be finicky and edit that out, but it's not worth it. It's not worth the effort to edit that kind of stuff out. But I think it's worth listening to.
So we did put the hours in. We did put that labor in, and we still have it. And I'm working on a process to get it out to y'all. So I don't know exactly when or exactly how I'm going to do it. It might be behind a Patreon wall at first and then come out to other people later. I'm still working on it. But that data is still in limbo. It's not lost. It's just in limbo.
The fan community is appreciative.
My computer shat the bed on me while I was recording my React video for episode 8. But I wasn't necessarily sorry about it because I kind of had a book cloak react to episode 8 my first time through, and it took watching other readers, like non-reader reacts to it and going through it the second time and kind of like, giving it a little bit of grace to appreciate it a little bit more. And so I still had the audio because I didn't learn OBS. I still haven't learned it in time to actually have like a professional looking recordings. So I was doing the whole thing where I had my phone recording behind me to get the screen, which meant I had the audio because I was getting the audio from my phone. And
nice.
So I still had, like hand gestures because you can kind of see my profile and the audio. And so I kind of went through and I at least took like cuts of the things that I had to say. And I've been meaning to go back and, go through and make some type of video of it and just keep putting it off and keep putting it off. And then somebody like last week, I think, commented on one of my episode 7 YouTube videos, and they're like, I can't find your video for episode 8 anywhere. And I was like, well, actually, I haven't made it yet.
Yeah,
I started getting back into making content for the book, and it's just sort of like, and that's what I do. And, and it was really hard. Like the first episode that I managed to make after the hiatus, I was proud of it, but it was hard. It was so hard to get it out. So I didn't feel like it was a bad episode, but it was like tearing my skin off to like manage to finally get it out. And then I finally felt like I settled in, and, and it was sad too, because it's like I'm in the middle of book 4. And so it's just sort of like, you want everything to just come out all smooth and beautiful when you're, when the story opens up and you're starting to do literary analysis for that level of Robert Jordan and getting into like serious complexities. But it also like let me see, okay, when season 2 comes out, yeah, I'm going to record react videos, but I'm not going to beat myself up about it, worry about it, stress about it in any way, because my show is not about the show. It's not about the show. That's not what it's about,
Right.
Yeah.
So.
And I agree. We are definitely changing our process for how we deal with the season 2. Like, we are going to make content. We can't not make content, but we are changing our process to attempt to avoid burnout for season 2.
And now I want to change the tone slightly because I want to talk about what got me really back into Wheel of Time content, which was the Dusty Wheels music video contest. And driving down to Aradia's house and just getting wine drunk and blasting out tribute and having so much fun with making that content and that video. Like, I just want to do a huge shout out to Dusty Wheel because they really found the fun in the community again.
I can't tell you how excited I was when I saw what song you did, because I love that song. It's literally my favorite Tenacious D song. So I was excited to see what song you did, but when you started, I was just like, and it was so good. I was just like, you got all of my votes, and I was sad you didn't go further, but it's just sort of like, it is what it is, and whatever. It was great. It was so great.
And when I say we got eliminated by a top 4 song, right? So that's totally fair, right? We went up against just the way brackets work, right? And the one thing I will say is, man, they got to show like 3 minutes instead of like the minute 30 or whatever. I wish you'd always, show the whole, hashtag play the whole song.
Yeah. I mean, I think we found our joy in our rhythm before that, but it definitely helped with feeling good about the fandom, because that was really the embittering thing about when the show came out. Like, the overload was real. We all set ourselves up with unrealistic expectations for the content we could put out. That was real. But the other really, really fucking shitty thing and the embittering thing was how divided, shall we say, euphemistically, the community became on issues of race and sex and gender and retconning and updating and what is canon, and do racist headcanons coming out of fuckwaffle mouths matter as much as the thoughtful opinions of people of color who have been enjoying fantasy for decades and have a degree in literature. And that was the thing that really made the Overload bitter and soul tarnishing in a way that I think pure Overload would have just been like exhausting. But there was a real like book cloaks, right? And Woke of Time, that song exists because of how toxic and horrible all the comment sections were, because women of color, of power, dared to be not killed off instantly, and white men kind of just wander around in the background following along. And that became vicious on both sides, in the sense that people couldn't stop like digging in, and they couldn't stop fighting because it's social media, because to Chad's point, social media is toxic and horrible. And it was just throwing gas onto a fire with a bellows pumping on it. And it sucked and I don't even engage in social media. Like, I don't get into fights, but I hang out in Discord servers where people come back out of the ring to like get water and a towel on their face. And I saw that side of it. And it was very, very disheartening.
I basically didn't argue with anyone, because my general go-to that I have gotten to the point of is to not argue with fuckwaffles. Like, the only time that I did was, I have like a fan account that I, like an inanimate object fan account. And so there was this one dude whose only purpose was to add his like toxic 2 cents to people's like nice things that they had to say. And it's just sort of like, you on your own can at Rafe Judkins and say shitty things. Why do you got to go into somebody else's thread where they're saying nice things and throw in your toxic 2 cents? How about fuck off? And I, went into my own inanimate object account to like go after this guy just for that purpose. Cause I'm just sort of like, what you have to say here, like, I don't care that you have an opinion, but go have it on your own thread and quit trying to like, muddy up somebody else's thread when they're trying to be nice, Sorry that you don't like their nice opinion, but somebody's being kind here. Why are you ruining it? And so I don't know. I had retweeted something where somebody was saying, it was something about how shitty toxic people were being, and somebody else got real butthurt. And so I was just sort of like, I'm not talking about you. I'm sorry that you personally, because you just don't like the show, feel like you're being attacked because we're talking about racists and everything. I get it. You feel like we're shooting those people with shotguns and you're getting hit with scattershot, and so you're getting hurt. And so I had this conversation in DMs with this guy, and he immediately wanted to tell me, yeah, I'm a conservative from Texas, just so everybody talks about Watt or loves Watt and everything. And I'm like, I already don't want to talk to you anymore, but I will, because I don't want to be the bad guy, And so I had a pretty good conversation with him, where I was just sort of like, yeah, your feelings about the White Cloaks and the fact that Tom doesn't have a mustache and everything are valid. You don't have to like these things. It doesn't make you a bad person, blah, 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 And it was fine until we got to episode 6. And then he posted this passive-aggressive screenshot of the Wheel of Time companion where it says that Swan and Moraine were not lesbians, and I was just sort of like, block, fuck you. And I'm sure that he was just sort of like, why did I get blocked? I don't understand what I did. And I'm just sort of like, and I get, that Rafe Judkins has said now that Moraine is a lesbian, and there was a whole fallout about that on Twitter like last week or whatever. And it's like, fine about that, but but at the time I was just like, you know what? Bisexual women exist. That happens. And I'm sorry, but the only difference in the canon is that they didn't break up, as opposed to that they broke up in the story, and that's literally canonically less different than what happens in the White Cloak camp with Perrin and Egwene. And I was just sort of like, and as a bisexual woman married to another bisexual woman, fuck you. And I was just like, yeah, that I just was so upset about it because it was just sort of like, I gave you the benefit of the doubt. I gave you, your feelings and validated you and soothed you and everything. And now just fuck you. Yeah. And so I kind of went off I was on the Leafcast post every show, and I went off a little bit, and they were getting their 1,000 followers on YouTube, and after I went off, they were under 1,000. I was just like, I'm sorry. I think I lost you your followers. Because, I got a little hot under the collar about it, because it was just sort of like, you've had all of these episodes to accept the fact that the show isn't what you want, Why are you still torturing yourself and watching it if it's not what you want, And so it's been nice to not have the show so that we just don't have that much heat, even though there are still people angry about it and still going off.
So, and during this time in the book, we got to talk about Egwene manipulating the Aes Sedai to declare war on Elida, which I have to admit is one of my favorite Egwene manipulations, where politics comes into the Wheel of Time. And I think it's kind of funny. I think it's one of my favorite bits of politicking, where she does trick the Aes Sedai.
So you're moving us out of the hiatus.
I'm moving us out of the hiatus, yeah. So because this sort of post-hiatus, we've watched the show, all these debates are going on, all this toxic stuff is happening, and we are trying to get back into the books. And we're talking about, Rand fighting the Shan-Chan and Egwene doing politics. And it's very interesting to sort of contrast the real-world politics that were going on around the show and this sort of mastermind manipulation that was happening in the books. That's sort of an ideal level of politics. It's like, oh, I understand where everyone's coming from, and I know how to fuck with them, and I know what they're going to do, and I can make them do what I want. Whereas in the real world, I feel like I was having the exact opposite effect, where it didn't matter what I said, everyone was just going to have their opinions. And so it was an interesting contrast, and it took me back into the books in a way where I was thinking to myself, this is what I like about the Wheel of Time, because it's an ideal world in a lot of ways where there is a master plan. It's not just chaos. It's not just what happens. There is the pattern manipulating things for an end goal. Robert Jordan is writing to an end goal. Things are getting better. Things are getting manipulated. There is a master plan, which is, God, a terrible phrase to use. But there is a plan. And that's, I think, what I love about fantasy as opposed to the real world is in fantasy, oftentimes there's somebody, whether it's Wit in Hoyd in the Cosmere, whether it's Fizbin in Dragonlance, there's usually some character who understands the meta and is manipulating everybody to an ideal outcome. I don't want to say a god all the time, because oftentimes it's like a character, but there is a someone with a plan. There's a puppet master, sure. There's somebody who's making things turn out.
A dungeon master.
Yeah, a dungeon master, yeah. Or, something of that nature. And I think that's why I find Wheel of Time especially, but fantasy so appealing to get away from the real world, because the real world just happens. And sometimes, the arc of justice does not always bend towards the positive, but in fantasy it does.
I actually, okay, so I have to say something.
Yeah, go for it.
I do think that, and I don't know, call me naive, but I'm a big fan of, Martin Luther King. And I do believe that the arc of the moral universe does, bend towards justice. I do feel like, and even listening to Morgan, listening to, I know you were so angry and you felt hurt and betrayed by this, online friend or whatever that you would kind of know. But the whole time you were talking, I was thinking in real time about, when I was first reading The Wheel of Time, and I know exactly, that line in the book, and I remember reading it for the first time. And I was thinking about, how much but also society and our community has evolved on understanding back in the 90s, situational lesbianism was like, that was Robert Jordan being edgy and cool, and now we've progressed so far beyond what was cutting edge 30 years ago. And to me, I find a reason to celebrate a little bit. We're having like this guy in Texas who, whatever, he was like saying, no, it says right here, but they were acknowledging, lesbianism exists. It's a real thing. He had to use it to win the argument. And I remember 30, 35, or 40 years ago, even as progressive or as modern as we were in the 80s and 90s, there was no way you could have even had this comment, or you're commenting yourself, I'm a bisexual woman married to a bisexual woman. Fuck you. That's a concept that just was not exist. And I think sometimes that we as progressives undermine our own joy because we don't realize that, yes, we are fighting battles. We're fighting, sometimes it feels like the same battles, but we're fighting them on different battlefields. We've made some progress. It's slow and it's hard, but we've made some progress. And I hope that allows us to find some joy, even though we're still fighting.
No, we get too angry, and I've been realizing that more and more. And I think it's partly because, like, my father has turned into a grumpy old man. Also, I went to a women's college in the 90s, and situational lesbianism was 100% a thing, so it's sort of like that's one of the reasons why Pillow Friends has never bothered me as much as it bothers other things, because it was something that was understood at the college that I went to, and it's sort of like nowadays, all of those women would be like, I'm 10% bisexual or something, because we've had an evolved understanding of what it is to be bisexual. But back then it was like, because, I'm hetero-romantic and I'm going to marry, a man, and I'm just, fucking a woman while I'm in college, it was just sort of like considered situational lesbianism. So I've just never been as bothered by the whole Pillow Friends thing as a lot of people, because I was in a place where it was literally understood and kind of a joke. But they just called them bugs instead of Pillow Friends for bisexual until graduation. But I've been noticing that I was just sort of like, I'm too angry right now. I've been angry over the last, 6 years or so. It's just sort of like, because it's just been really frustrating.
Yeah.
And I don't, I don't know, since about 2016, and it's like it's not helpful, because I have always been someone who does not believe that most people are bad people. I believe that generally people are fundamentally good. And, I had to kind of explain that to my wife, who, did not grow up in a situation where that was the case. We had a situation where we needed our lease fixed, and she felt like the landlord was not going to do us a good turn because he was a grouchy old man. I'm like, let's go talk to him, He's not going to fuck us over. He's a decent dude. He may look like a grouchy asshole, but he has done things or behaved in certain ways that indicate to me that he's actually a nice person. Let's talk to him. And we left that situation with a lease, even though we were a day late. They were really good to us, and she was very surprised. And I'm just sort of like, and kindness begets kindness.
Yes.
One of the things that I love about the Wheel of Time is that the main characters all have such a fundamental decency. And it's just sort of like, and that's one of the things that frustrates me about the toxic people on Twitter, because I'm like, how can you love this book series and miss the fundamental decency of the characters? What is it that speaks to you in this book series? Is it just the, explosions or something? How do these people speak to you if you're not seeing this inherent kindness?
Well, and that actually brings up a really good point that I was thinking about just while reading it, is even in the books, Robert Jordan does a great job. I love that you have bad characters that don't mean well. You have your Tharabas, your Sylvanas, and he separates those from your dark friends, from your truly agents of chaos or lovers of darkness. And I think that's the thing that we kind of gloss over, and we don't quite understand that you can be someone who has poor motivation or poor reaction for whatever reason from those who are truly dark friends. And I'm not saying you never necessarily win them over, but I think understanding, like you said, someone's intent and what someone is trying to say helps you determine that there may be a grumpy old man who you may have more in common with than you do someone who's sitting next to you, but is doing it for the wrong reasons, no matter what the thing may be.
Yeah,
Totally.
and I feel like, I try to be self-aware, but sometimes I feel like even the most self-aware people are less mindful than they realize. And so I have thought to myself, I'm like, I think I have a lot more negative thoughts, but it's almost like static beneath the surface, and I'm thinking shitty things and about people and not even realizing it. So and this just occurred to me yesterday, I want to be more mindful and look at, each object and think about each person that I interact with and see something beautiful about it, see something that I like about it, and just do that, because it's like I don't want to move through the world and continue to be, angry, because it doesn't help anything. And it's just sort of like, and do I have a right to be angry about a lot of things? Sure. But it just doesn't help.
It's very much the way of the leaf, right? Being angry only hurts yourself. Like doing violence, having that sort of, I'll say that sort of Twitter vitriol feels like doing violence to me in the way that like you can go out there and curse people and get in arguments and be angry, and at the end of the day, you're just hurting yourself.
Yes. Yes.
And that to me is really where I've come down on a lot of this social media stuff, is like, I need to stay away from it, because in the way of the leaf, I am just, by lashing out, I am just making myself feel bad.
Well, and even if you think about it almost from a, like perspective, when you're interacting with someone, even like when we are here through technology, when I am, getting emotional or getting, conversational or whatever else, I'm getting feedback and everything. When you're online doing social media, all that vitriol is staying with you. It is sinking into your pores. It is sinking into your mind. It's not going anywhere because you're not actually interacting with anyone. You're just typing and it's bouncing back on yourself.
That's a wonderful point. I never really thought about it like that, because you can completely disengage. And, a lot of times I'll let someone have the last word, because I'm just sort of like, if I'm having a negative interaction with someone, I'll say whatever snarky point that I have, and then I'm just sort of like, and they can go on, and I'm not going to go back and read what they say, because as far as I'm concerned, if I don't, then I win, and they can continue on and on and on, but I have not accepted the rest of their vitriol, and so I feel fine about, that, just not going back and no longer engaging, but it's just sort of like, one of the things that I've always tried to do, and it makes me more patient, or has made me more patient with people, is I always try to see other people's sides of it, and it's been harder lately because there have been people who do things that just don't make any sense whatsoever, but it doesn't mean that, like, even if someone does something that really annoys me, or I find someone annoying, I think to myself, well, why might they be the way that they are? Or even just like, a lot of times I look back on myself, because I'm just sort of like, I know that it took me to my mid-30s to gain emotional intelligence. It took me a real fucking long time, like a really long time. And, it took me, I look back on things that I did in ways that I behaved because I was like, well, I didn't mean any harm, and I assumed, of course, everybody knew that, because my heart was so pure, everybody knew that. Nobody fucking knew that. And so I'm sure that all of these people I assumed must have liked me. None of those people liked me.
But the opposite is also true. A lot of times I assume people didn't like me, and later I'm like, oh yeah, you were great. You were fun. Like, I hear that all the time from people I reconnect with. They're like, oh, I enjoyed hanging out with you. And I was like, oh, I thought I was a piece of shit. Like, I don't know, like, and so there is that sort of not knowing how other people perceive you, because they're not in your head, and I think Perrin's a great analogy for that, right? I mean, Perrin and his, like, sensing other people's emotions, but he totally misinterprets them, right? And it does, because he's not in their head. He doesn't know what's going on in their lives.
Yeah.
And also, just to kind of take that you're saying and kind of tweak it a little bit, you're saying they're not in his head. Maybe he's too much in his own head. Like, maybe that's what the problem is.
Yeah.
Yeah, he smells the emotions, but he has no emotional intelligence, and he takes responsibility for them without actually communicating with people who are like, hey, how about maybe don't?
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. I mean, obviously Fail is the prime example where he takes responsibility for her emotions when he really shouldn't be, right? He doesn't have the emotional intelligence to understand where she's coming from. And something else that I wanted to bring up that happened during this sort of the return.
Which is January through April, just kind of
January
for temporal
April,
context. So basically winter through spring, just.
And at the very end of the return, Watt Spoilers turned 5 years old.
We did.
And I realized that I have been doing this, and I didn't realize it at first. I totally missed the anniversary. I'm not a big into anniversaries and stuff like that when they happen. But, thinking back and being like, when I started doing this podcast, did I think I'd still be doing it in 5 years? Absolutely not. I thought it would last 5 months, and so how much I have changed in my life in 5 years, how much the podcast has changed, how much the world has changed in those 5 years, I don't have a lot to say other than holy crap, 5 years, like, that's a big deal for me to be doing this for that amount of time and to be, weekly or multiple times a week be putting out this sort of content. But then to have people still supporting and still listening and still caring about it after 5 years, and just to still every once in a while come across a Twitter post or a Reddit post where people are like, oh, I finished the series. And someone's like, oh, then you should check out Watt Spoilers. This is a great podcast about, the show where they unpack a bunch of things that you may have missed.
We got called theory gods the other day.
Ooh, I didn't see that one.
Yeah. I went and checked our Twitter and someone said, oh, you should check out. Yeah, they said 2 Watt theory gods go through the books with all the theories. And I was just like, oh, thank you, random person on Twitter.
So, yeah, and all the things that go along with that, the reviews, the donations, the people who show up to live recordings, the people who just download and listen, the people on a weekly basis, the people who have helped us plan SpoilerCon over the years, the people who have, visited me in person, the friends I've made. I don't know who I would be today without this podcast. It would have absolutely changed who I am. It's added a real point to my life in a way that I don't want to say like, oh, my life is all about the podcast, but in a way like, we all have that grind of getting up and going to work and feeding ourselves and washing ourselves and doing laundry. That's just, it feels like a grind. And to me, the fact that I get to do this podcast has made that all worth it in a way that I don't know how to express to listeners.
It's meaningful.
It's meaningful. It feels like I'm doing something meaningful with my life. And that's a crazy thing to me, right? Like, I mean, I've worked so many jobs and I've done so many different things, and part of, I started a new job fairly recently, which is in part 4, which is a big change for me, and still keep coming back to this podcast. And I keep coming back to this community as the group of people who are my people, who I care about, and I've been reading these books since I was 14, 15. I've read them over and over again. They've always been a part of my life, and they just keep becoming a bigger part of my life.
Right?
And I can't thank Robert Jordan enough. I can't thank the community enough. Harriet and his brother, who I cannot remember his name. Wilson Grimes, Wilson Grimes, who was just getting to talk to him, getting to talk to Kate and Michael. Like, these are the levels of engagement and people I never, ever thought I would get a chance to interact with. I still regret not having another chance to go back and follow up with Wilson, because he was such a Matt. Oh my God. He was such Matt. It was like, if I've ever met a Matt in real life, I was like, oh, okay, Matt was Wilson, right? Like, and knowing that maybe Matt was based a little bit on Wilson makes me super happy, because he does have that just easygoing personality of just everything seemed to go his way. He seemed so happy to talk to people. I mean, the fact that we got to interview him at like 2 a.m. outside a dance floor when we were all just wasted drunk was just my favorite thing in the world. Yeah, and the fact that like Michael Kramer and Kate Redding, who I listen to on a daily basis, show up to SpoilerCon and give interviews and
introduce every single episode of the podcast. Like, I can't even think about it without like tearing up a little bit and like disassociating and being like, no, that couldn't actually be happening, right? Like, it's been happening since Fires of Heaven, dude.
I know.
Like, someone asked in Discord the other day, like, who's the voices just changed. in Fires of Heaven, what happened? And I went back and listened to early Fires of Heaven real quick. And sure enough, there was Patrick giving a pitch for the SpoilerCon where you guys won the right to have Michael and Kate record a thing because they put it in the thing. So it was like, holy shit, since Fires of Heaven, we've had them. It's wild.
Okay, I this is really surreal for me. I have to say this to you, Seth, and Aradia. So, like, I just realized, like, part of the reason why this assignment was so hard for me when I was going through and everything that you gave me the different times, and I just realized why, is because I wasn't even listening to this podcast. I didn't even know it existed when you guys were recording it in October before the show.
Right.
And I found it afterwards. And I'm going, why don't I remember this stuff? And I'm like, am I too high? What's going on? But I say all that because I had said I was going through a series of depression and anxiety and everything. But you guys podcast, starting with Seth, you and Travis, and then, and then of course, Aradia coming on, has been a part of my, like, getting better, my healing. And you're talking about things that for you were 5 years ago, and I'm picturing them, when I was at a lower point back in February when I found that episode or whatever else. And so it's very interesting to sit here now and know, looking back even then, and to say, hey, you're going to be a guest on this podcast one day. I mean, and you're going to be healthy enough to be a guest. You're going to be able to talk about love and peace and kindness, and let's not focus on anger, and let's be more mindful, as Morgan pointed out. I mean, this is just blowing my mind, and I want to thank you both, because for this person, I think I found this podcast during this process so that you guys would chronicle it for me, and you have been so helpful. The theme song is just so, just even it emotes, it creates emotion, and I really appreciate you guys. I'm grateful that I found you, and grateful that you guys do such a great job, all the editing, all the time. So, you make a difference in everyday people's lives, as well as how wonderful it is to meet Harriet and Wilson and everyone else.
Thank you for saying that.
And I gotta say, yeah, thank you. Really appreciate it. When you came on as a guest the first time and you were like, I binged it, and you're like, it holds up, and that's something that I always, that was so affirming to me, because I don't know, like, this is something I've been doing for 5 years. I know the audio quality has drastic variations in it based on, different situations and different microphones and technical problems. And I'm always wondering, is this something that is worth going back and listening to 5 years later? Is it worth binging as a whole? Or is it just something that people come along with? And because you can't go back. You can't go back and change the work you did 3, 4, or 5 years ago. I can't undo decisions that I made 3 years ago, as much as I would want to in hindsight. Like, there are things, and there are things that I regret doing. Absolutely. Would I change it? Probably not. Like, we've gotten to where we've gotten because, and oh my God, that's an analogy for life, right? Like, of course, there's things that you look back on in life and you're like, oh, if I knew the future, I would have made a different decision. Maybe. But I didn't. I made the best decision I could at the time with the information I had. And I'm happy with where I am now based on those decisions.
Yeah, for sure. And this is, we had both of you as guests in this period. Both of you came on somewhere between January and April. And the other thing that came on the podcast was adding ads. We got involved with iHeartRadio, Spreaker, Media. We got syndicated ads. We're going to be doing an ad campaign into their carousel of ads pretty soon here, if I actually finish writing it. That has been a really big transition for us in this, where it's not that we don't appreciate the Patreons and the fans. It's just I wanted to try to up my hourly wage. And when the podcast host that makes one of the podcasts I was binging ever since October, I found this podcast forever ago. I don't know why, but I started binging in October Behind the Bastards because I was stressed about SpoilerCon. SpoilerCon was at the end of October. So I started binging it and I listened to it through, about January, February was about when I got through their entire back catalog. So I was very saturated in hearing about iHeart and hearing what their ads were. And then we got this email. to add
Wow,
ads
yeah.
to our thing. It felt like I had asked the universe for this to be the year where I get more like income, and then this happens like from iHeart. It was very surreal. So that the spring was the period where I started fumbling my way through learning how to do this. It's been a bumpy road figuring out how their interface works and going through our back catalog and deciding where and how to put the ads, and then deciding after I'm halfway through that I want to go back through and change a bunch of stuff again. And like, it's been a wild process getting involved in that. And it's not like beating out the Patreon yet by any means, but it is the beginning of us making more out of this. And it's been a very trippy experience. Also, we've changed providers for putting up the episodes and distributing it. Overall, that has been an upgrade. And also now through the Patreon, I had it briefly, so you had to go into the Patreon app to get the episodes without ads. But Holly, I believe, in Patreon told me that there's a thing you can do where you just put the link into it and it will show up like as an RSS feed thing in people's podcast apps, just like normal through Patreon. So again, it was a bumpy road to get here, but I think I have figured out how to make it so that way people who have the $5 or more Patreon can just get our episodes ad-free in their podcast app, just like normal. I believe that is a thing. I probably just jinxed it.
Well, again, as a fan, I'm really excited about that because I joined to up my Patreon to get the ad free because, of course, I want to go back and binge it again already.
And I can't make that work for the back episodes. That is the one flaw in this, is I can't do that for the back episodes. I'll have to do that manually for each of the back episodes. So it will be consistent for book 9 is my hope.
Gotcha.
For the return for me, as far as at the very end of it, I went to my first JordanCon, but if you're still talking about ads, I'll wait.
No, I'm done with ads.
Okay.
Yeah, we're good.
Yeah, so I got to go to my first JordanCon, and it was wonderful and difficult. Like, I was hoping it would be easier than SpoilerCon was as far as social interaction, and it was, but also, like, not. And I don't know if it was that I was starting to feel sick toward the end of it or whatever, but I just started to feel tired, or more and more tired. And it was just like the peopling got harder, and I was like, I've got to do something to get better at peopling, because it used not to be so hard. Like, I used to have like really on point social skills and not stand around and like not know what to say to people. And I'm not exactly sure what happened. Like,
there was a pandemic where we couldn't interact with anybody for 2 years. That's what happened.
Yeah. I feel like I got worse even before that. I don't know. Maybe it's like I met my wife and just kind of got like, you know, really wrapped up in her and stopped like interacting a lot with other people. I don't know exactly what, but yeah. So I just felt like I struggled a lot to talk to people and really like know what to say to them, and it was kind of difficult to, you know, move through. And I was like, you know, I had jokingly, as like an intro into a couple episodes, been like, you know, if you're going to be at JordanCon, come and say hi and have an excruciatingly awkward social interaction with me. But I didn't realize that was quite so accurate. Like, I didn't know. But it was still a wonderful experience, and, you know, and I look forward to doing it again, and hopefully I'll be better at it next time. So I just, it was so wonderful. At the same time, it was so difficult. I'm hoping that SpoilerCon will be doing better again, you know, so we'll see. But yeah, it's been a hard mental health year, like Chad said, you know, and it's just been like a lot of anxiety and a lot of stress and a lot of everything. And I highly recommend JordanCon to everyone, but yeah, I think it's a lot of introverted nerds where they say hi to each other and then after that they just don't know what to do, and it's like deer in headlights. So Anyway.
Yeah, and that we didn't get to go to JordanCon, unfortunately. We got priced out.
I put off buying my tickets because I didn't save up money fast enough. It was a whole cascading thing. I've actually had a weirdly good mental health year, particularly when it comes to socializing, just arcs in my own life. I've been very ready to socialize and I've been putting myself in new situations, albeit like the tiniest of baby steps. But fuck it. It took me 15 years to talk myself into it. I'm going to consider it progress.
Fuck yeah.
So,
Yeah, absolutely.
I'm actually quite looking forward to getting my second chance at the JordanCon experience by going to WatCon, since there is such an overlap in terms of the people who want to go. And I'm really hoping that, that gives me enough of the same experience that my FOMO about JordanCon is mitigated ever so slightly. And then SpoilerCon, if I ever get my shit together, will be great.
SpoilerCon is coming, guys. We have a date. We have the hotel room. We just haven't gotten information out about it yet. That is on us because,
to be honest, calling it a con is a misnomer, guys. This is not a con.
Yeah, it's not a con.
We are going to hang out and do a silent auction and have Michael Kramer and Kate Redding talk to us. That is...
And do a live recording.
And dress up one night, because why not? Everyone wants to dress up, right?
A lot of people have costumes.
This is not a con. Like, the name con just rolls off the tongue too well, but it's never been what we've actually put out, and it's not what we're doing this year, especially.
I gotta say, I think it always sounds like it's the most fun because it does sound like just a group of people hanging out, drinking beer. I think when you guys did a hike or something, even like the first year, like that.
Yeah, we really are. Yeah, it's spoiler hangout is really more inaccurate than con.
Yeah.
Spoiler.
It's just that we're too big of a group to get an Airbnb, so we have to rent parts of a hotel. It's the problem.
Right.
Basically, it's a bunch of friends hanging out in an Airbnb, but like we're hoping to have capacity for more people than a reasonable Airbnb can hold and stuff. So
and one of the things we're not doing this year is we're not providing food this year, because last year there's so many food carts and places to eat around the hotel that it really, like, providing food felt almost like, oh, here's the food you have to eat and you had to pay for it ahead of time, felt like counterproductive. There will be snacks and stuff for people who need.
Just go eat the amazing smells that are coming from down the street. There are too many options.
Right.
Seriously, we're going to force you to go enjoy all the food.
Sounds yummy.
It's so good.
And also it's Portland. Like, Portland's a great city to go hang out in. So that's the other thing, is like, come to the city, enjoy Portland.
Hey, that's a good advertisement. On the East Coast, that's not always that's not always the image of Portland that we get over here. So I'm glad to know that it's true to its to what you guys call, because ever since listening to the podcast, it sounded amazing, like one of the most amazing cities. So
it's great.
I think it is. And there's a 4-block radius that's like probably not great, but that's so far away from where we're like having the con that it doesn't matter. And it's also a 4-block radius. Like, it's a tiny little spot of Portland that's, kind of got fucked up for a little while.
Really? That's it? Just 4 blocks?
Oh, no, it's not even that. Because I live in a suburb of Portland, so I had to go, because I wanted to do notes for my episode at SpoilerCon, and I had to walk, several blocks to a UPS store. So I actually finally walked through the protest zone, and, it had been cleaned up and a couple of spots were fenced up, and it was just nothing. It literally like 2 blocks, and I was just sort of like, they made it look so much bigger and more dramatic than it was, but it was literally nothing. So
on the East Coast here, like, I thought like it was like Antifa's like last stand, or whatever. That's like all the news and everything was like just, Portland, the liberals went crazy. They defunded the police. There's crime everywhere. And then, here comes all the neo-right fascist groups, and they're doing exactly what, the Nazis did in 1930s. And, you got the Antifa over here. And I thought it was like just a constant overturning, like, just battle in Portland that sounds amazing.
no.
It's not. It's a media creation.
No.
It's a media creation.
I hate the media.
So my solution to that was I happened to find a streamer on one of the very first nights. I just happened to be fucking around with streaming software, and I happened to be like, oh, there's protests and there's people who are using the streaming stuff. Like, I happened to find a streamer who was really cool and went out almost every night for like 100 nights straight. So I just watched his feed for like 4 hours a night for like almost 100 nights straight. And I would always, drop $5 in his thing. And like, I just saw it as it was on the ground. Like I didn't watch any media feed because I'm not in Portland. I don't like cities. I was living in a much smaller town and now I have moved much more rurally. Like I'm not a city person, but I wanted to see what was happening on the ground. And it's like, looks like angry people have done reasonably mild things for that.
Wow.
And the state has massively overreacted. And, looks like a bunch of neo-Nazi right-wing fascist fuckheads, white supremacists are getting weirdly left alone by the state. Well, So like, that was my view of it, was just one streamer walking around showing me that like, if you just listen to non-white, non-cishet men, then you'll probably expect about what you get from a raw feed. You'll be like, that looks about right.
And it would have stayed a lot more peaceful, but Trump specifically sent in the feds to like stir it up and make it shittier. So if that had not happened, it would have been like really chill. So, yeah.
Yeah.
And as someone who lives in Portland, there's like one spot that I'm like, oh, that block kind of sucks. Like, and don't get me wrong. The other thing about Portland, property crime is a thing, right? Like, don't leave your car unlocked. Someone will probably open it up and steal your change out of it.
Yeah, cost of living is huge here. So there's a big homeless problem, and that's the city's fault. And and it's really sad and fucked, but it's just sort of like, that's not their fault. So yeah, I always try to keep, some cash in my car to hand out to people who are standing, with their signs and shit. It's just kind of like, that's just tragic. It's not.
But that's being true in every city in the country. Homelessness is a problem, and West Coast cities tend to get more of it simply because our weather tolerates people living on the streets year round.
Yeah, same here in the South.
Sure, yeah. The climate dictates a lot.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's no worse here than in any other major city where people can survive on the streets. Yeah,
even in Oregon, the whole I-5 corridor, every city that is along the Willamette Valley I-5 corridor from, Ashland to Vancouver in Washington, it's the same. Worse in Portland because there's more roads that come into it and there's more property,
and it's more expensive.
It's just a higher density to match the higher population density. Right. Like it's and out here in the country in the boonies still exists. Yeah. Still exists. The conditions are slightly different. It's rainier. You have to have a trailer, but like having meth head neighbors that move a property every few years is like normal. Like that's just the state of our society.
Yeah, and it's just it makes me so upset, but it's like, I don't blame poor people for being poor. I blame rich people. So that's
right.
Anyway.
Yeah.
Yes. Tax the rich, eat the rich, and hashtag fuck cars.
Eat a few and then tell the rest that fair taxation is the price of not being eaten. It should sort itself out at that point. I want to return to my timeline just a little bit.
Yes, please.
Other things in the book that matter are that Randa has his war in Altara, which I was thinking of while we were talking about like Twitter wars earlier. I'm like, man, that's like Rand and the Shan-Chan. Nobody wins. Everyone just walks away feeling like shit. Narishma also gets Kalendor, and Alviarin comes back for the first time. Those were kind of the big events.
Can we talk about Narishma for a minute? And okay, so I don't know. Again, one of these fan things, when you're Seth, you and I were reading at the same time, and think about my brother Jason and my best friend Todd, and reading these books, and you hear the one who's going to come after, and then it's Narishima, and then it's like nothing. What? Like
Nothing.
what was the point?
Like, did I miss something? Are there missing pages?
Yeah, and I think it even spawned like a theory, like maybe Narishima wasn't the first one that came after, and there's like a hidden someone's going to come out or something. I don't know.
So where I've fallen down on that is that Narishma will be the head of the Black Tower at some point in the future, and will be the leader of male channelers, and will become a major figure in the Fourth Age.
Oh, so
it just happens after the end of the books. So
prophecies go back to being normal everyday prophecies. We don't have any more apocalyptic prophecies. Okay.
Right.
So Narishima's a bureaucrat one day. We get it. Okay.
That's one of those things that, like, we get some prophecies that are post last battle, right? And I headcanon that the one who follows after is Narishma, who will be, he has one of the highest potentials. He's one of the strongest Ashaman in the future. And so he's still very young. And right now, Logain is leading. And also Brandon Sanderson sort of made Logain the head of the Black Tower for now. But I really do see Narishma as being the next big leader. And this, in the same way that, like, if Egwene had lived, she would have been the next big leader of the White Tower.
Right. And the fact that he was the one chosen to pick Kalendor will probably carry some weight when it comes time for him to put himself forward into the ring to be the next leader, who'd be like, well, the Lord Dragon did entrust me to retrieve Kalendor that one time, so I'm pretty cool, right? Like, that might be why those things are tied together, is because it helps him have that platform, like, in 50 years.
Well, of course. And that even makes sense a little bit, because if you look at again, and Seth, correct me if I'm wrong here, but like the whole premise of Wheel of Time is how one age's ordinary, normal things wind up becoming legend and myth and everything else in another age, because you take something out of context, whatever else, and so all of a sudden Narishma just doing his job, and then he gets to be a leader of the Black Tower. Who knows how they get that obviously part of that is Arthurian or whatever, that gets just spun down, and meanwhile he's just he's doing his job.
Right. Yeah. But he just is the one who's going to follow after, right? I also do think, from a practical standpoint, Robert Jordan came up with prophecies that he didn't exactly know how he was going to fulfill them.
He was inspired by the muses.
I think there's a little bit of like, we're like, man, Jordan had so much of this plotted out ahead of time. He knew where all of his prophecies were going to go. No, that's bullshit. He was just really, really good at coming up with vague prophecies and then writing his way into them, if that makes sense.
Jordan was a hardcore pantser, and I think that's one of the things that makes him such a brilliant writer, at the same time that it causes like certain problems and makes certain things clunky, is the fact that he pulled so many things out of his ass. I mean, it was just sort of like, and he wrote scenes, and then he had to like connect lines, and so much of, and a lot of writing is organic, particularly for people who are pantsers, but it's like, Stephen King, in his book on writing, he says that at the time that he wrote the book, that only 2 of his novels were actually plotted, and those 2 were his least favorite novels because he felt like they just weren't as good. And it's like, so there's depth, and just like, it's organic when you're writing something and you're just kind of, pulling it out of your ass, and you're putting it out there, or you're writing these different scenes and just kind of connecting it together, and you've got the whole thing maybe in your head, but it's just this kind of nebulous thing going on. And so he had things that he was specifically good at, and stuff that he kind of would connect together, but there was a lot of stuff that, I don't think he knew where it was necessarily going. And it just, one of the things about the slog is because, especially once, he didn't know he was going to get sick. He was still a pretty young man, and so he kept introducing more and more things and more characters that he never got a chance to wrap up because he, didn't know. And so he thought he had time. To the detriment of the story in certain places, but it's just like, them's the breaks when you are writing a story in an organic way like that. And while it's sad and unfortunate, and it does have its downsides, the upsides is that you've got something that is just so much more fun to read. There's a blandness to things that are strictly plotted out.
And that's where I'll bring up Brandon Sanderson, right? Brandon Sanderson is a very careful plotter, very careful outliner, and I love his books, right? I am currently re-listening to Stormlight Archive. I love it. I think he does a great job, but he outlines everything, and there's a certain sterility to his writing that it doesn't have the organic, it doesn't quite find the pleasure centers in the same way that Jordan's books do. It feels like things are planned out ahead of time, and I don't know how to really separate those, but the outlining that Sanderson does gives me a bit of a sterile feeling occasionally, where I'm like, oh, that has to happen because he has these things planned out, and that's not necessarily happening because that's what the characters would do.
Yeah, that's, I think, why I didn't really take to Sanderson's stuff. I read 4 Mistborn books, and I'm not compelled to read the other ones, even though they're on my shelf. I bounced off of Stormlight pretty quick. Like, I've been spoiled by unpredictable authors. Like, if it's too predictable, I have too long of a TBR to be wasting time on a book I can see coming.
I actually agree with you, Aradia, because I think a lot of people have noticed there's like a stiltedness when Brandon starts to appreciate his work, appreciate him finishing the series for us. But when you were talking, Seth, I feel like what makes that difference to me, and maybe, again, I don't mean to regionalize or whatever, but Jordan being a Southerner and knowing how to tell a story. I feel like when I'm reading his books, or especially listening to him, Egwene, that it's like talking to uncles or whatever. And I feel like there's a component of Southern culture, actually, regardless of race, white, black, any other colors that live here. There's a Southern storytelling nature and culture that allows you to kind of almost, tell a story off the cuff. Even think about, any of the famous legends or whatever of Southern lore that I grew up with, it's all about the storyteller that kind of, narrates the story so that, like, Brer Rabbit gets, free over this thing. And, they just kind of come up with as they go. I mean, I remember taking storytelling classes, and that's one of the things, we, learned and everything, how to like tell when I was a teacher, telling the Anansi stories, or whatever like that, and being able to change the story based on your audience, because that's really what every Southern storyteller is doing, is you're telling a story for the people on the porch,
Mm-hmm.
And I've heard, Jordan came from a family of storytellers. He told those stories on the porch. His family told stories. That's what they did. That's what his family culture was storytellers. In a lot of ways, Jordan inherited his more of a descendant of Mark Twain than Lord of the Rings Tolkien.
Yes.
Right? Like, there's he comes from that era, that kind of storytelling, of a kid going up a river and discovering all sorts of crazy things, as opposed to a hobbit journeying to an evil place.
As opposed to a scholar being taken on a forced field excursion into enemy territory.
Exactly. Yeah. Right.
Going back to our conversation we had about the TV show and everything, and I hope it's okay for me to bring this up, but I almost think that's part of what some of the struggle is, because that kind of storytelling does not make good TV shows. It barely makes good movies.
Sure.
It's meant for audio. It's meant to be heard. I think it's one reason why so many people love the audiobook so much from this, because that's how he writes. That's how you're supposed to hear it. And it's supposed to have this cascade of characters that you never really always find out, because there's always another story waiting in the story for the next storyteller, the next generation to come in and talk about, oh, well, you remember when, you connect all the stories together in like some sort of the original metaverse, I guess, the storyverse or whatever. And I think is what he was kind of doing with Wheel of Time. And I went back and watched the series actually in for this TV for this podcast tonight, because I wanted to like put myself back in that mindset for Aradia. And I think that is one reason why the TV show, as good as it is, doesn't quite hit all the right notes either, as Seth was even saying, because it's meant to be an oral story. It's meant to be, a complex casserole of narration, and he's Southern. You got to have a casserole.
I am minded of Tom's rant about players and how could people possibly want to see players when there's a gleeman like him? Like, I feel like you're just embodying that rant. I'm almost like Jordan didn't want there to be a TV show. He's like, no, it's perfect the way it is.
That's why you got to take TV show for what it is. It's got its good things, got its bad things, got things I love, things I don't love. But you got to just take it for what it is, because you got to realize that's not the way it was intended.
Well, and I always thought a TV show would be better if we did like the 26 episode seasons, so you could have like an episode that was someone in a bath telling a story. Like you need to have the slow episodes where nothing actually happens. You need to have the filler episodes in the middle where you're actually a little bored and you get to build culture and stuff like that, where you're not having not every scene is important, not every scene is actionable, but you get the flavor of the cast, the 17 layer green bean casserole, right? Like you need all the 17 layers.
Give me the Star Trek treatment.
Exactly. Yes. Yes.
The TV show is a charcuterie board instead of a casserole.
Yes.
Hey, I love a charcuterie board now. You got me there.
I love charcuterie boards. My mother-in-law even got me a little cutting board that says I like to cook periodically and has a periodic table on it. That's like, it's way too small to be a real cutting board. It's totally a charcuterie board. It's perfect.
I'm a real estate agent here in North Carolina. And so I buy my clients when we close a home. I have the a local potter here, and she makes the shape of North Carolina and a charcuterie board in the shape of North Carolina. And so, so I love charcuterie boards.
Oh, that's wonderful.
I kind of hate making them, I will admit. I love eating them. I hate making them.
Yeah, the trick is to make them before you want to eat them. So that way, when you want to eat them, they are instant satisfaction. You have to do it ahead of time.
You just take the whole sausage and just eat it like a heathen.
Well, I mean, that's true.
But like when Matt wakes up in the White Tower after the healing,
and the mustard,
he basically eats a charcuterie board, right? And the mustard and the rolling up
and the
and the ham. Yep, that's what I'm talking about.
I would like to return to my timeline with respect to the real world, because a lot happened between January and April. No matter how in the sand your head may be, you probably noticed that the war in Ukraine came into existence in that period. The continued raging debates about the concept of critical race theory and speaking about history at all during Black History Month, just to kind of pair those things together, just the continuing reckoning on race that our country is having, and then also the new and eerily genocidal attacks on trans people. These are kind of the main issues from the real world that we don't talk about on the podcast because we are escapism, and that is our niche, and that is how we make the world a better place. But these things all are happening in this period and are continuing to happen as we record this, and
are heavily on our minds.
They all suck.
Yeah.
And they're all on our minds, and it is work to keep them from getting into the podcast. The podcast is an escape, and I just want to acknowledge we're aware.
Well, and I want to say, first off, as far as it being Pride Month, I want to say, remember that Pride was started by a trans woman, a Black trans woman, the great Marsha P. Johnson. So I just want to, shout out that, and anyone who, has had to deal with, being assaulted or have any sort of violence done against you, especially for being trans, I stand with you, and we need to remember that too. So, yeah.
I'm nodding. And also, we've seen the draft opinion from the Supreme Court about
Jesus fucking Christ.
Basically that hasn't come out officially yet, but we're all sort of holding our breath for the anti-abortion.
I have a little bit of faith. I have faith that somehow we're going to get some sort of technicality. And I can't believe we're going to overturn Roe v. Wade. I just don't.
I can. Yeah.
See, the thing is that all the people who have been doing this for decades say that we absolutely are heading for it being overturned. And it's
I believe it. I believe it.
Yeah. I hope you're right. I hope
we've been warned for so long. And I was actually talking to another liberal friend of mine a week ago, and I was like, I can't believe this is actually going to happen. And I was like, I really just think that at this point, maybe we just need to let them have their way and let society just fall down and then rebuild it.
That was what some people were saying in 2016 to me.
Oh, that's true. It's only gotten worse.
was like in the build up to 2016. They were like, maybe we should just burn it all down. Maybe this is how we burn it down. It was like, I don't think that's going to work.
I'm just playing, by the way. That was a joke. I'm not serious about that.
I don't think that's a good idea. Yeah. No, the problem with that is a lot of people die in the fire. A lot of people die in the fire when you burn it all down.
Yeah, but it is tempting. It's so frustrating that I very much empathize with that. Like, what if we just burned it down? Like, what if we ate the rich? You know, like, what do we got to do?
It kind of reminds me when you get into a new project at work and you realize that you've got this massive technical debt of code and you're like, oh, I just want to start over. And then you go start over and you realize you're like, oh, this is way more work and I'm making a lot of mistakes. They're just different mistakes. And I'm not coming up with a better alternative because I have to go through the same process. Like, to build a society, you're going to have issues, you know, and like burning it all down and starting over again doesn't always lead to a better outcome as much as you want it to, but it doesn't. It doesn't. You have to improve what you have.
So many guillotines.
I think it's because it's easy to be right. It's a lot harder to be better. And I think that's what society is kind of like focusing on, or at least I don't want to say, I don't want to speak for anyone but myself. I feel like my job is just to be a better person tomorrow than the person I am today. And I feel like that I can control. And if I can control that, then you just have to make it through and hope. I feel like more and more people are at that point. So I think that's why I'm cautiously optimistic that the world's not going to end and we're not going to burn it down, because I feel like more and more people are trying to be better people.
I mean, it's a hard thing to burn down, so it's better to be optimistic and to take your little piece of the world where you are and make it better, right? And like follow the campsite rule wherever you go.
Clean the spot of floor in front of you, as Egwene would say.
Be like Egwene and clean the floor in front of you, because like you never know the influence you make. Like Seth and I are kind of blessed, right? Because we have a podcast with a decent reach, so we get people telling us that we're helping them. But like for mere mortals like yourselves, and that doesn't includes Morgan, because Morgan's a podcaster. But for mere mortals like the audience, you never know, right?
Wow, mere mortal. That's that.
I'm just telling it like it is. Tarvalin After Dark tells people to fuck off. I tell people that they're mere mortals.
Okay, so for me, the best part about that, and if you need to cut this out, please do so. But I love that quote came after Radio took a big old hit on a bong. It was absolutely beautiful. It was really a fuck you moment.
Is my MO. Like, I'm like Elon Musk, but cool and without an emerald mine. But it's you just never know, right? Like if you make yourself a better person, if you help put yourself together and like fix your own shit and integrate with your shadow side and go to fucking therapy and drink some goddamn water and accept yourself for who you are.
Do the shadow work.
You will influence the world to be a better place. You cannot fix it all. Like that's a thing we need to let go. We can't fix it all. And that does not absolve us from fixing what we can. Like both things are true.
Okay. Cut that part out and like make that like, send that to me as like, I want that to be my phone message. That would really hit the radio.
It is the combination of Buddhist and Jewish philosophy, mainly.
Oh, a Jubu.
I'm ethnically part Jewish, and I've been studying some Pima Chodron with my grandma recently. So I've got Jewish philosophy and Buddhist philosophy rattling around in my head, and I've been doing a bunch of therapy. And so I just have a lot of thoughts, but they are not mine. I'm just amalgamating all the zingers.
Gotcha. Well, that's funny you said that, because I grew up Pentecostal, and I've been doing a lot of studies of Buddhism and during my healing process. Well, listen to this podcast actually, and so like I get this whole like integration of Pentecostal thought and Buddhist thought. So it's a little bit crazier even. So
yeah, and I've always been
much more emotional.
I'm like I've always been like super like left, but figuring out what that actually means has been a journey for sure, and figuring out like, oh, there are people who are violently opposed to what I take for granted. That's a reality I need to somehow come to terms with, because I live in a bubble. I live in an echo chamber. I live in a safe bubble, and it is so easy to just turn off social media, turn off the news, and like not know things. It's very Difficult to balance being aware enough to be active, but also like curated enough to be hopeful, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
So I want to talk a little bit about me, because I feel like we're getting too philosophical. So I'm going to get a little
All right.
Go back into myself, because I want to talk a little bit about the ending, because we sort of went through another big change, as we are wont to do. Not only do we start doing ads, I got a full-time job, which is really the first time since the podcast started that I have been working full-time. Well, since I guess I did a little bit in the beginning of the podcast. I lost that job, and the podcast has been my life. I am back working full-time at an engineering company, and as part of that, Aradia has taken over a lot of the podcast and has become the life and the living, working blood behind the podcast. And I think it's only improved the content we're creating and the editing we're creating.
I like to think so. I don't know.
I think it has.
I don't know if my amount of hours I put into that is appropriate. I'm so detail-oriented. I'm sorry. I'm interrupting.
But, you know, I've come to this point where I'm showing up for recordings, and I'm not doing a lot other than that. And I'm hoping to get, you know, a little more free time once I get a little more comfortable with my job. But my first week of the job was during JordanCon, right? That's one of the reasons I could not go. I had literally just started this job, which to me is a whole revelation. Like, I am suddenly at this level where I'm actually getting paid a living wage for the first time in my life. I'm learning a lot of new things. But I'm exhausted, guys. Like, I am tired. This is so much work. There is so much going on where I am, you know, I'm making computer chips, right? I'm working on very advanced machines, very expensive machines, and learning a lot. You know, I'm so happy that I've been able to hand over pretty much the entire podcast to Aradia, and it's running on its own.
Wow.
And with Aradia, and I shouldn't say on its own, with Aradia has been able to take over and step in and do all the work that I was doing. And that we are still putting out content on a regular basis. And I you know, a huge thank you to Aradia.
Oh, thank you. I'm trying to take this seriously. It's hard.
Yeah. From a personal standpoint, like, my life feels very different than it did 2 months ago. Right. I am working 12-hour shifts, and I don't necessarily have time to do all the content consuming that I used to do. So, yeah, just in terms of things that have changed for me, my life, my day-to-day life feels very, very different than it did 2 months ago. And I'm still adjusting to that.
Not much has changed for me with you getting the new job. I'd basically taken over, but you're still less available.
Yes.
It's definitely like, when can I manage to pin him down to like do any of the administration beyond just recordings? But, you know, like I've said before, I speak for all of us when I say, like, we're glad that you're employed. Like, we're really happy for you.
Yeah. And that does mean that now I'm able to direct almost all the Patreon money to, you know, 2/3 of the Patreon money to Aradia. Aradia's taken over editing Tarvalin After Dark. And so, you know, that's able to go to her. So I'm happy that we're able to, you know, I'm making my income through my job, and Aradia's making at least some money through the podcast. So it's been happy to go in that direction for me.
Well, Seth, I want to say that actually is kind of inspiring, as you know, as someone who created the show, that you're willing to put it in the hands of someone else and step back and allow it to kind of grow. I mean, this says a lot about you as a person. It says a lot about your integrity as a creator, that you're more concerned about your creation than you are your ego. And I think this says a lot about you as a person.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, he has been remarkably generous with the creative license.
I mean, that comes something from necessity, right? Where I'm just like, I can no longer micromanage it the way I used to, because I used to micromanage this podcast. Like, I mean, just every little sentence, everything that I would edit so much and spend so much time editing and making decisions and talking to guests and timing and you know, managing Patrick, right? Like, I mean, that was something that was a big part of my job back in the day, and having Aradia, you know, be able to step up and, you know, do that is not something I ever thought I'd be able to hand off to somebody else, right? Because, like, this podcast was my baby. It was and is my baby, right? Like, I don't know how else to put it. Like, it was my baby, and I never thought I would give that up. And I have.
Yeah, well, you taught me everything I know about podcast editing. So there's at least a signature style to it.
Hardly.
Well, and think about this. So I'm a former kindergarten teacher. So Seth, your baby went to kindergarten, and Arady is a wonderful kindergarten teacher who's taking care of it and teaching it and taking it to new levels, but it still gets to come home to you.
That's such a good analogy.
That's very good. That's very good.
Yeah, it's been a difference, but we are both managing to go to WatCon. You are managing to get a little bit of space from your job.
Bit, yeah.
Which is cool.
I get paid vacation now. Oh my God, I've never had paid vacation.
Yeah,
and it's been years.
In this period where your life has changed, now we are into the ending. We're into the show is the joy has been rekindled. We're getting through to the end of the book, and at the end of the book, what happens is that Tovann meets the Black Tower, shall we say, euphemistically. Adelius gets murdered. Varen's compulsion from the beginning of the book comes into effect, and we have the Sun Palace attack. And of course, who can forget, Fael gets kidnapped.
Oh,
the beginning of the longest plot lines.
Yeah, so that's kind of the episodes we've been working through as Seth has been going through this transition and telling me about his new schedule and telling you all about the exciting things he gets to do. And all of that has been happening as those events have been happening through the books.
I would love to hear Morgan's take on the whole, because you guys brought up in these most recent episodes some really good stuff about the whole Adelius and Van Dien and everything. And I'd love to hear Morgan's intake or Morgan's take and analysis because she just does such an amazing job with her interpretation of. I'd love to hear her take on Adelius and Van Dien and the murder and everything.
I really love Adelius and Van Dien, honestly. The fact that, he has them as, Moraine's, secret little, Google cache out in the middle of, the Arafel plains and then brought them back. I remember him bringing them back in, I think he brings them back in the middle of Lord of Chaos. And then having them end up being, fairly significant tertiary characters. And it's they're so old, it seemed inevitable that, because, he never wants to kill his darlings, it's nobody significant ever dies. He never wants anybody to die, unless they, sort of suck. He was finally willing to kill Pedro Nile, but it was just sort of nobody really cared about that. So having someone who it's sort of you could feel bad about her dying and then making it somewhat tragic because she's got a twin sister, so that it's some serious tragedy going on there. I felt like it was a real step up, even though it wasn't a main character. So I felt like that was a good job on Jordan's part, and also it was a great way to set up the beginning of Elaine's arc, because it's immediately she's almost a Camelin, and she's here's this glaring evidence of you can't trust the people that you're with, and one of the people who were your staunchest allies is gone. Now it's sort of you can't trust the rest of them, and so she gets to start out right away on a really shaky foundation. And so I feel like it was a really good choice. So yeah, it's a gruesome death, obviously, but I like it. And, it's they don't need Ispan anymore. They've been towing her around with a sack on her head this whole time, sort of almost a comical prop. But it's you've got to cut her loose at some point. So I just felt like it was a good setup to have, Elaine's home and everything's fucked.
Yeah. And she's been bound by the Black Oaths to really not reveal anything. And that sort of, I really like the contrast of them and in the White Tower, you've got Pavara and that group trying to track down the Black Ajah. And they have the Oath Rot, and they're able to release the Black Ajah from the Oaths. And that's how they're actually able to be effective. Whereas Van Dien and Adelius, they're doing this torturing and this questioning, and they got nothing because she is bound by the three Oaths. And it shows you the effectiveness of being bound by the Black Ajah Oaths.
Whereas I believe it's at the beginning of Winter's Heart in the prologue where they managed to get Taline to forswear her oaths. I really love that. I feel like the subplot with the sitters who end up being the Black Aja hunters is one of the best later subplots, partly because it has very satisfactory resolution.
Yeah, well, great storytelling and like strategy, or I don't know the right word, logistics or something of the way the storytelling went about. It was almost like you were like getting to actually fit the final pieces of a puzzle together and walk through that. It was very satisfying at every step of the way. You were like, oh, this is the whole puzzle.
Yeah, and then they ended up not just being like a satisfactory subplot, but they were right there ready to end up being Egwene's allies to help her into the Amerlin Seed. It was kind of really beautiful. I love that subplot.
Me too. Yeah, I love all Egwene, so
me too.
But I love the all, that whole thing too. I think it's just tremendous character. Which actually I was going to say too, going back to your whole Adelice and Vendine and Ispan and what Seth said, I think it also kind of highlights exactly how noble our beloved Varen is, because Ispan, it shows the tenacity and the resilience of the Black Aja oaths, and Varen has spent her entire life, or entire time as a Black Aja, finding a way around those most powerful oaths to do the purpose that she wanted to do, which is to betray the Black Aja. Which, I mean, that's some veins of gold shit right there. I mean,
and it took her a lifetime, in fairness. It was 70 years. I mean, that is a lifetime of study.
Gave her life for that. Yeah.
Yeah. That's a good point. Yeah. God, Varen's just, she's so great. She's so great.
Varen's great. My girlfriend Never is listening to Shadow Rising right now, and Varen is popping up with Perrin, which, by the way, Varen and Perrin in the same scene is hard to listen to sometimes, especially in the car when there's some road noise.
Which Inn is doing it?
Was that Perrin? Was that Perrin? Yeah, it's just all context. But again, just how much I love Varen in those scenes when she's just like, I could leave if you want me to. And Perrin's like, no, I don't want that. That would be bad. Like, you're healing people. Like, she's like, okay, then I guess I'm staying, and just I love her. She's so fun. And that dress is green is just such a classic line from her. Like,
I'm going to die when we get there. I'm going to literally die on the podcast when we get there. That's in like 4 years, but like, I will literally die.
And then, what was the other thing you were talking about towards the end? Adelice and Vendine. Oh God, how could I forget? Fael being captured. Jesus fucking Christ.
The beginning of that.
That was the storyline. That you talk about the slog. That was the slog.
I don't hate that as much as a lot of people do.
Really? Why?
Well, I hate how much Perrin broods about it. I feel like if Perrin were in a grief coma until he starts to be able to do shit, it would be better if we were getting the rescuer side of it from, like, Berelane's perspective and Galen and just people that aren't Perrin, so we didn't have to be so much in his head with his suffering, and it would give a chance for RJ to give us more minor POVs, because I feel like that's some of the stuff that he's best at. And then being in Fael's head, it's like Fael not with Perrin is one of my favorite things ever, because it's just sort of like, that is great. So I love once we get in her head and out of their relationship. So Fael in the Shido camp, I'm here for it all day long.
Okay, Morgan, you have convinced me that the problem is being in Perrin's head during all that. You're exactly right, because you're seeing it from the point of view. So I can't wait. I hope you have Morgan back to talk about some of the Fael being captured, because that analysis was great, Morgan.
And the other thing that people don't realize is there's actually not that many pages dedicated to being in Perrin's head. It's just spread out over 3 books, right? If you actually look at the page count, it's like Perrin has like less than like 10% of the page count of any of. He's like one of the fewest POVs, lowest POVs in those books. He really isn't in it much.
Yeah, I think he has 4 chapters in Winter's Heart. It's a really small number. It's just excruciating because he's walking around camp a whole bunch and feeling really upset, and it's just sort of like, and it would be just, I'm just like, put me in Barrelane's head instead. I want to hear what Barrelane thinks about all of this, not what he...
Give me multiple POVs. Yeah. You do that in all the other chapters, right? Give me, like even with Rand attacking the Shan-Chan, we get some Shan-Chan POVs. We get some Bashir POVs, right? Like, we're not just in Rand's head thinking about his guilt and all that kind of stuff.
That's what makes those war scenes so effective, is how much you hop through. And because Jordan can take a minor POV and flesh out a real person in 3 sentences, and even when you don't even know who that person is, and then if it's someone that you know from somebody else's point of view and you get them, and then it's like even more, fleshing someone out. I'm so here for it. That's another thing once you're getting deep into Elaine's succession arc, is it's just sort of like if he had broken that up and, split it up, given you, Birgitte, Elaine, and
Dylan.
In my last episode, I was like, yeah, Dylan, put us in... Give us Lady Dylan POVs, because we never get any, and I'm like, I want to hear what she thinks about Elaine and why she thinks she's the best one for the throne.
Nodding.
So
same, Aradia, same.
Yeah. No, it's... We're about to need to keep ourselves grounded in those truths as we come across those chapters in our upcoming book.
Yeah.
Elsewhere in the real world, the only real things I had to point out are just that the economy is like more fucked than it's ever been in my lifetime. And like, could all the gunpowder please just defuse overnight? Like in Dies the Fire? Like, please. Like, I mean, yes, we have so much to celebrate as Pride Month happens, but also like, my goodness, could we have a world where like, a book about war and trauma isn't escapism?
Yes.
Is that so much to ask? I do want to share though, like a thing. So I've been listening to lots of podcasts that aren't Wheel of Time, and I got this cool phrase from one, which is the antidote to anxiety is action. And it was specifically with respect to anxiety about the world. Mm-hmm. So as we, transition from one book to another and are left floating in space and the real world has a chance to grab us in its claws, like, remember that if there's an issue that really boils your blood, find a way to participate in that. Find a way to fall in line behind someone who's doing what you believe in. And like, probably the anxiety will ratchet down slightly, a little bit. At least the world will get slightly better around you. Because my goodness, do we have a plethora of things to pick from, And
I think, Aradia, what actually, and Morgan, please feel free to pipe in because you're the expert on this, I'm sure, when you get into doing something like that, you're basically doing what you want to do. You're doing what makes you happy and allows you to be mindful. And I think that, okay, so have you guys seen Don't Look Up on Netflix?
Yes, I loved it. I know. I loved it.
I mean, to me, the lesson of all that was like, so basically, Jordan, with Spoilers podcast, so I can say this. So basically, there's a comet headed to Earth that's larger than the one that destroyed the dinosaurs. And the scientists are Leonardo DiCaprio and Jennifer Lawrence, Jennifer Lawrence is amazing.
I loved both their performances. The cast was mwah.
They're trying to tell everyone that there's a comet coming and that it's going to destroy the Earth, and it's all in this course of politics and media, and so no one listens. It becomes a little thing, and it's just look up to see the comet, or don't look up because they're trying to lie to you, and it's all this stuff. And Leonardo DiCaprio gets completely like caught up in it, like his whole life gets overturned. He loses his wife and his kids, and then at the end he comes back to it because they've tried everything, nothing's going to work. The comet's going to end. It's about to crash in within 24 hours. He comes back home, and they just have a family dinner, and it's like, if you can just be mindful while the world's ending. This is, again, going back to our original conversation, where I think you get a little bit of hope, because if enough people are mindful and making themselves better, I think we can, if not prevent the comment, but make it a little less damaging. So I feel like, doing the good to fight that anxiety, is really just about getting out there and doing something that makes you, makes us, makes the world better, and then getting caught up in it so that we're focused on what's going right, what we can control. I think that's just beautiful radio.
I mean, also the message of don't look up is don't even bother, because it's all going to end anyway.
Well, okay, so take about beautiful positive word.
Just to, give you the twist, because I'm a millennial and the only things I like are twisted.
It's also ultimate escapism. You just sit around and, talk about whatever you want to, and the world doesn't think it's okay.
This is fine. To quote the meme, this is fine. I have so many houseplants. This is fine. It's actually amazing. I have so many houseplants. I'm good at killing plants. It's weird that I have so many. My friend keeps bringing them and I keep not killing them, and they're starting to stack up. It's kind of weird.
One of the things that's always frustrating for me is I'm just kind of like, I wish that we had a dragon, I would vote for a 19-year-old, crazy kid if he were like who, actually gives a shit about fairness and wealth inequality and people in general,
And could just dictate to the nobles that, you have to feed the peasants and you can't just take from them in a poor year. And
you can't polarize the fact that, air exists.
Yeah, and if you do, I'm going to melt you with my mind. Yeah. That's one of the reasons I found Zelensky so inspiring, is I'm sort of like, this is the closest thing to a dragon it seems like we have. It's just sort of like, no wonder people love him. He's kind of great, it's just sort of like,
His sheer attitude reminds you of Rand in full fuck you noble gentleman mode.
No. The average age of our Congress people is really quite depressing. We are ruled by a geriatric society that I wouldn't trust to, work on my computer, right? I wouldn't, these people are so old, they are, for the most part, would be forced into retirement in any other working situation.
They shouldn't be allowed to have driver's licenses.
Yeah.
Much less drive the country.
Most of them don't.
Much less drive the planet. I mean, America is driving the planet towards so many different kinds of catastrophe. And it's really just 17 crusty old lizard people that are posing as white men. It's just there's hyperbole and truth buried in that,
People are controlling the future who won't be here for it.
Exactly. We are dealing with the fact that climate change is a fact of life, and the rest of our lives and our kids' lives and our grandchildren's lives and our great-grandchildren's lives, the human race's outlook is climate change continues to be a thing. Do we go Waterworld? Do we go Day After Tomorrow? Do we go
Handmaid's Tale?
God.
Yeah. What scale are we talking? It's very hard to say.
That's why I'm I'm married to a millennial, and I ask her, I'm like, what do you want? There's here time to vote. What do you want? What's the world you want to live in? Because you got to live in it longer than I do. So tell me, and I feel like that's just reasonable.
And we have to be aggressive about these changes, and old people clinging to power are not going to be anything but reactive, and we need to be proactive at every level, and we need to stop the coordinated fascist takeover of our entire society that has been literally going on for longer than I've been alive. Just like climate change inevitability is something that's been going on longer than my entire life. We need young people to be in office, please. First of all, fucking vote. For fuck's sake, my county in Oregon, 21% of ballots were returned. We have vote by mail. First, I know electoralism isn't everything, but how do you think old people hold on to power? It's because only other old people are voting for them. If someone doesn't want you to vote, maybe consider why they're pouring a shit ton of money into keeping you from voting, and fucking vote.
Right. Well, that's the thing, is they are preventing voting. There is the gerrymandering, the amount of votes that are they're making it difficult to vote. And when you're already struggling with daily life, it becomes very, very hard to get out there and vote. And there is a little bit of both sidesism, right? I'm the last one to say Republicans and Democrats are the same. But there are certain corporate endorsements where both sides do support kind of the same thing. And that's where I get really frustrated, where I'm like, I don't see necessarily, I see two old people who are both endorsed by corporations, and I don't necessarily see someone who is there to change things.
Well, and that's, again, the second, like, which got me off on that tangent was like, we need young people, right? Not only do we need to vote, we need to be running for office. I hold elected office, FYI, so I am, in fact, entitled to scold everyone. You should be running for local elected office because it is at the county level, at the city level, at the school board level where this fascist takeover of literally coordinated effort that is driving national politics is happening. So, like, if you disagree with that, then get on your fucking school board. Right? It doesn't matter who wins the primary in the Democratic election, in the Democratic, president. What doesn't matter. What the fuck is happening in your school board and why do you not know?
Oh, I love the idea of a bunch of gothed up punks coming in and ruling the school board. That just sounds like beautiful.
I mean,
I was going to say it because I grew up very conservative, evangelical, right-wing, Southern conservative. And when I was in my late teens and early 20s, I was, proud member of the GOP. And, one of the things that we were taught was, go and be a part of these small elections because there's hardly any turnout and you're easy getting there. And then once you get one, you get soil and water, then you can easily move to, school board or county commissioner or something else. And you kind of work your way up because they always need someone to do it. And, I think Republicans, I'll applaud them, had the foresight 30 years ago to focus on local elections and focus on judicial. And, their work has paid off, and I think that it's ultimately on, if you don't like that vision of the world, find another way. While doing it, I encourage you to find common ground. I encourage you to look at it that everyone's trying to make the world their version of better most of the time. But also, if you don't like their version of better, go local and look at the judiciary.
Yeah. Exactly. The apathy of the left, the cynical, holier than thou ness of the left that, like, I absolutely grew up saturated in. I've always voted, but it's always been against this nagging voice in the back of my head that it doesn't fucking matter, blah, blah, blah. And it's like, but the other side doesn't think that way. So, like, especially in Oregon, like, I wish vote by mail was accessible everywhere. Like, the fact that voting is so difficult and so many people are disenfranchised by logistics is just, I don't understand why vote by mail isn't national. Like, I personally could not stand to vote if I had to go through what I see pictures of for, like, what voting is like in the rest of the country. I'm so grateful that my entire voting experience has been able to be in Oregon. Like, I can do research. Like, I do all the research. Like, in our household, I basically just give Brandon, like, the TLDR of what's on in the pamphlet and what's on the ballot. And, like, we get to go through it, like, with a glass of wine and, like, drive it in. It's fine. It's easy. And I don't understand why it's not everywhere. It's been this way, like, since I was born, more or less. It's fine. But still, people don't use it. Fucking people still don't use it. We get, like, the best voter turnout in the country. Sometimes it's like 50%. It just makes me so mad. It's free. It's fucking free.
And assuming your address is up to date, assuming they haven't purged you from the voter rolls, assuming, your mail doesn't get thrown away. I'm not saying it's a better system than I've seen anywhere else, but it's not perfect.
Yeah. And I mean, the fact that millions upon billions of dollars is getting poured into keeping the vote from being effectively used says something. Just Occam's razoring it.
But one thing I do talk about, local politics in Oregon are good. Like, for the most part, I like what Oregon does with its policies more. There's a reason I live here. I like its policies more than any other state that I've looked at.
Yeah, on a lot of the issues that matter to me. Yeah, Oregon is like, oh, well, I'm glad I was born in this state then. That's handy.
And that has a lot to do with the vote by mail, in my opinion.
Yeah, we have higher voter turnout. Shockingly, that makes better shit. I mean, there's problems. My goodness, are there problems? But
right. And a lot of the problems are city problems instead of, state or federal.
Yeah, no, the problems that I deal with in my elected capacity have to do with budgets. That is the problem, is that we are in a resource extraction state where the laws have been heavily tilted towards industry. And so that sucks for the rural part of the country, or for the rural part of the state. So run for office, but also make art, right? That's part of what we do on this podcast, right? We make this escapist bubble where people can binge through years of content and find healing, where people can get a piece of comedy on their morning commute. Like, you can't only focus on doom and gloom, right? You have to make art.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've been going for about 2.5 hours here. So I just wanted to see, is there anything else that we want to wrap up? Is there anything else that we want to touch on? Is there any other points you wanted to bring up, Aradia, on your outline, or?
I think I have run my mouth for a minute. Enough minutes, for sure. Thank you to our guests very much for being part of this conversation.
Huge thank you.
I had a lot of fun. And is there anything else that either of you would like to say?
I feel like we should mention the fog of war. That was such a theme of this book, and I want to say you guys did a great job, covering that. But I would love to hear, Morgan's last thoughts about, any part of the book or the fog of war or whatever. Anyway, so we can end on a book note would be good.
Well, honestly, this is my least favorite of the books, and I think partly it's actually I don't know why. Maybe it's partly because I feel like it starts out really slow and the flow is really weird. And I'm looking forward to, when I get to it, figuring out how to break it down and decide how I'm going to look at it from a perspective of literary analysis. I'm right now doing my last episodes for The Shadow Rising. I think I'm in the middle of one, and I've got probably 2 more, and then I'm going to move into book 5, so it's going to be a while before I get to this one, but I've noticed that with each book, I, of course, have a greater appreciation of it once I get to the point of looking at it and how it was written, or the point of it. And I know that this book was kind of broken up. The way that he was trying to do where the slog got broken up really strangely. But, I really like Crown of Swords, and I know some people think it's, a weird book, or that it drops off really strangely at the end. But I'm particularly fond of that one. This book has a lot of good stuff in it, though, and so I do think it's going to provide a lot of good episodes and good material.
What I found is this book was a lot of chunks, right? It was a chunk of Egwene, a chunk of Rand, and then sort of a weird, then a lot of demounting, right? The end had a lot of sort of the high point of the book was quite a bit before the ending of the book, which is not usual. And it's yes, thank you. That's the word I was looking for. Long denouement, the long ending to this book with a lot of plot that sort of, we're going to be okay, is there going to be another exciting thing, or is this all just set up for the next book? And it turns out it's all just set up for the next book, right? And so if you sort of realize that the ending occurs in chapter 25 out of 32, you're oh, okay, that's why it's structured very weirdly to me. And also there's a lot of we're going to do all of Rand here, we're going to do all of Egwene here, as opposed to bouncing around like we normally do in his book. So yeah, I agree. This was a very oddly structured book. And I think, again, if it had been structured differently, it could have been much more exciting in terms of, and I think that's true for the slog in general, it's just a weird editing. Yeah, we're so used to building up to a big final battle with the Forsaken, and that's not what happens in these books.
Yeah, good point. And that also probably contributes to the feeling of the slog too, because not only you're reading it, you're not getting the characters you want. There's years in between books, and then you get the book, and you're like, okay, wait a minute, where's my? When am I battling Grendel? When am I taking the next country? Where is Cimarron? I remember reading those and feeling that way, about that. So I think that's definitely true. If only we could go back and re-edit it.
Yeah, it's a good point. The structure's weird. And maybe that had to do with the fact that he was getting sick. Maybe that was part of it. But, then I point at Knife of Dreams, which I feel like is such a good, well-written, well-structured book. Like he nailed it with Knife of Dreams. So. Well,
and it's funny though, because I remember, and I don't know if this is true or not, and I hope the fan community or chat, whatever, will correct me or get it right. But I think if I remember correctly, back during the time, there was some sort of article or zeitgeist gossip or something that he's trying another storytelling style with these 3 books where he wanted to really slow it down and tell the story intricately from one point of view or another. I don't know if that was actually a thing or if it was just like gossip or urban legend or whatever, but I thought I remember there being something about like him deliberately trying to change, like for the sake of fantasy or whatever, like change the way fantasy is told or whatever with these books. But I don't know if that's accurate or not. So it may just be me pulling out of my ass. So
I like that headcanon. I'll accept it.
Yeah, I'll accept it.
I love your friend, Morgan.
This is Percival.
Morgan is cuddling an extremely adorable tuxedo cat with a mustache, and he is the cutest.
Oh, yeah. He's so sweet. He seems so affectionate.
Yeah, he's a good boy. He wants food. That's why he's over here.
He's also covering up your shirt, which I should have shouted out sooner. It's a dragon banner, like dragon, but it's with a rainbow. It's like a pride dragon, and it's super dope. And where did you get it?
So Sarah from Spear Maidens made a podcast called The Queer's Blessing. Though I think she only did a couple of episodes of it. She had me on, and she had Ann from Cool Story Podcast. And so she made a Redbubble shop that has several different iterations of gay Wheel of Time stuff.
Nice. Yeah, I noticed on Twitter another queer Wheel of Time podcast specifically came up. What was it? I'm already forgetting the name.
Just came out. It's called Queers of Time, I think. Hold on.
I forget. I retweeted their stuff. I already forgot. I was just like, it's queer. Retweet.
No, it's Queers of Time. If it's the one that just came out, that's got James Stark and Camille and Matt and
yeah, that's a whole bunch of personalities that I know.
4 people
hanging
these
on Twitter
folks.
vaguely. Yeah, I hope that goes well. God, there's so many podcasts out there.
Yeah,
I cannot with all the podcasts. I'm happy for them, but I cannot. It's too many. It's too many. It's an avalanche.
There's
podcasts.
Lots. It seems like plenty of them only put out a handful of episodes, though, which I understand. It's like being able to put out continuous content it's a commitment.
Yeah. No, I was just beating myself up about not doing Broken Earth consistently again today. It's like, it's not that hard. You know how to do this.
Yeah, but putting out a podcast by yourself is just like, even if you've got Seth sitting there quietly, and it's like he's got a full-time job now, so it's literally a ton of work to do something by yourself.
Well, because this is the easy part. It's the re-listening to it a million times and the editing and then the polishing and the promoting and making sure. I mean, I again applaud all of you for your work because, if you really think about what goes into the finished product that we all love to binge, it's a slog itself. It's a slog itself.
Yeah. It's like if
you're not wrong. No.
If you make a podcast with other people, you have to hope that they're going to be able to keep their commitment, not flake out, and decide that they want to continue to do it with you. And if you're going to do it by yourself, you have to be capable of putting in the hours and hours and hours and hours and hours and hours and hours of work that it takes to put out a podcast that actually has, content that, is listenable, and that's just part of it. And so being able to do that on a regular basis is a lot. And I long ago got over being like, I have to have, drop an episode every 2 weeks. And if I don't, then now I'm just like, fuck it. I'll put it out when I put it out because I'm just not going to do this to myself anymore. Obviously, I'm not good at forcing myself to do anything. And I know that. I'm almost 45 now. I know that. I've known that my whole fucking life. So it's just sort of like, and whether I have adult ADHD or I'm just lazy, I don't know. But it's it is what it is. So, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I can't say how thankful I am that we've managed to put out this podcast every week for more than 5 years now, right? Like, we've averaged more than an episode a week. I mean, for a while there, we were doing 3, and then 2, and now 1. And like, we've definitely slowed down, but then the amount of content we're putting out with each episode has increased by quite a bit. So in a lot of ways, the hours we're putting out hasn't really changed. And I can't say how grateful I am to the people around me who have allowed that to happen. I mean, everything from Patrick to Aradia to the fans to the guests to...
Takes a village.
Takes none.
Takes a Discord server.
It does. It takes a village. Like, this is... Yeah. By the way, huge shout out to John Algen. He did so much work.
At Visit Andor on Twitter. You need to follow at Visit Andor. If you're on Twitter, worth it.
He was the guy that volunteered to do the editing at first.
Yes. And what he did is he always took a first pass at my episodes where he would go through and remove just the ums, the uhs, and some of the silences, and that first pass meant that I could concentrate on editing for content. And he put in hours upon hours upon hours of work, and I don't thank him enough. I really don't thank him enough for the amount of effort that he put in and the amount of work he did to make Watt Spoilers possible. Like, I owe John a huge debt for the amount of work he did.
That's cool.
Yeah. I felt a little bad taking his job, but like, what could I do?
Yeah. And right now, when I turn it over to Aradia, just the way the process works, it just didn't make sense to keep including him in the loop. Because Aradia is much more of a perfectionist than I am, so she was able to go through it all herself.
But you gave me like my kryptonite, or also like my crack, my heroin, my true love, which is instructions and a standard and no time limit, but just enough of a deadline. Like, you give me those things and I will just go crazy and like ignore my partner and ignore my bodily needs and just play Tetris until it's perfect. And yeah, the fact that I don't have to, you set up the pattern and all I had to do was optimize making it more better. Like, it's literally like heroin for my brain. It's addictive.
And we changed the process. We used to sit down and when I first did the podcast, we'd record when we could record, and often we record 2, maybe even 3 episodes at a time, and then over the next week or so, I would edit them whenever I had the time. So I'd turn those over to John. He'd take a first pass. I'd come back. Now we record an episode. Aradia sits down and knocks it out in about 24 hours and publishes it. So, instead of having... We get feedback on every episode now before we do the next episode. Whereas before, oftentimes, like I said, we'd sit down and record 2 or 3, sometimes even up to 6 episodes would be sitting in the queue before they would be published, and that it was a very different process, and so in terms of talking about how the podcast has changed and evolved over the years, the fact that we do an episode and then it gets published right away is a big change, actually, and one that I don't think a lot of people have even necessarily noticed. But you are getting these episodes 2 days after we record them, as opposed to 2 to 3 weeks after we record them.
I think it's good that, again, as someone who like just binged this whole thing, I think it's good that you explained that, because there's definitely a different feel, and I think it's because there are less errors or whatever. It's a little less homey, but you get a little more like polished, but also standardized kind of content that comes out quicker. That's also more responsive. So I think it's appreciating what was and appreciating what is, and understanding that the two. So I'm glad that you explained that, Seth, because that actually kind of helps to appreciate both or the evolution of this podcast.
Yeah, and to be clear also, like, it's possible because I am effectively self-employed doing this podcast and nothing else, right? I have the time to be a homemaker and I don't say I'm unemployed. I don't say I'm unemployed because I am employed. I do say I'm unemployed because I'm used to saying I'm unemployed, but technically I'm not unemployed. I am self-employed as a business owner, but I have the freedom and the time to just sit down and do that as like my job. right? Like if I had a day job for realsies, it would be harder to create that turnaround. So again, big thanks to the patrons for making it possible for me to like be like, no, I'll just do a bunch of domestic work and I'll do the podcast and I'll put other irons in the fire and I'm going to make this work. And it's because of the patrons that's an argument that I can make to myself.
Yeah.
I'm going to call it and say thank you so much for joining us on this nearly 3-hour journey for Tangents. Really, really appreciate you guys being here. Really appreciate everything you've done. Morgan, thank you so much. EgweneFanboy, Chad, thank you so much for coming on for a second time. Aradia, thank you for just being awesome. And I'm going to thank myself for
starting this whole thing.
Yeah.
Well, Seth, thank you for getting it all together. Yeah, here with Morgan, it was an honor being on here with you. I'm touched. Aradia, it was love seeing you again. Seth, thank you, all of you. Thank you for your creation. You've made this person's life a whole lot better because I have your podcast. So thank you.
Yeah, this was great. I'm so pleased we did this. And yeah, with that, thanks everyone.
Thank you for listening to the Wheel of Time Spoilers podcast. Rate us in the Apple Podcast app or support us on Patreon. Is that good enough?